Picture this. The year is 1763, and the British Empire has just won the 7 Years' War. But boy, wars aren't cheap. What a victory it was. The British Empire, flexing its muscles like a gym rat on steroids, had emerged victorious in the 7 Years' War. But, as anyone who's ever thrown a massive party knows, the cleanup can be a real headache. And, in this case, the cleanup was financial. The empire was broke, its pockets turned inside out. In their wisdom, the British decided to recoup some of the war's cost from their colonies across the pond. And thus in 1764, the Sugar Act was born. Not as sweet as it sounds, this act imposed taxes on sugar and molasses imported by the colonies. Imagine being asked to cough up more for your morning cup of joe. That didn't sit well with the American colonists, who were starting to feel like a piggy bank being shaken for every last penny. But wait, there's more. The British, not content with just sweetening their coffers, decided to meddle with the colonists' money as well. The Currency Act of 1764 restricted the colonies from issuing their own paper money. Talk about adding a dash of salt to the wound. So, by now the colonists are feeling rather like an ATM. But, hold on, it gets worse. Fast forward to 1765. The British Parliament passes the Stamp Act and the colonists are not having it. Now imagine you're a colonist in the New World, minding your own business, and boom. The British Parliament decides to slap a tax on every piece of paper you use. Newspapers, legal documents, playing cards, you name it. If it's paper, it gets taxed. The Stamp Act of 1765 was the first direct tax on the American colonies. And let's just say, it didn't go down well. It was like adding a tax on coffee today. Unthinkable, right? This leads us to the formation of a little group you might have heard of, the Sons of Liberty. They were like the colonial version of a rebellious rock band, but instead of smashing guitars, they were smashing the ideals of British control. They were responsible for protests, boycotts, and the occasional tarring and feathering of tax collectors. 5 years later, in 1770, things got even more heated. The Boston Massacre happened. It was a chilly March night when a confrontation between British soldiers and colonists turned deadly, leaving 5 colonists dead. This event further fanned the flames of rebellion, adding fuel to an already raging fire. Then, in 1773, the Tea Act came into play. Now the British weren't just taxing paper, they decided to tax tea as well. The colonists' favorite brew was now a symbol of British tyranny. This led to one of the most famous protests in history, the Boston Tea Party. Colonists dressed as Mohawk Indians boarded British ships and dumped 342 chests of tea into the harbor. It was the ultimate act of defiance, like flipping a giant middle finger at the British. After the Boston Tea Party, things really started to boil over, pun intended. Now we're in 1774 and Britain is really mad about all that tea in the harbor. I mean, who wouldn't be? That was a lot of good tea, and it didn't even have the chance to be steeped properly. But I digress. In retaliation for the Boston Tea Party, the British Parliament passed a series of laws known as the Coercive Acts, or as they were more colorfully known in the colonies, the Intolerable Acts. These weren't your everyday, run-of-the-mill laws. Oh no, these were designed to punish the Massachusetts colonists for their audacity in standing up to the crown. Among the most egregious of these laws were the Boston Port Act, which closed the Boston Harbor until the colonists could cough up the cash to repay the British East India Company for the lost tea, and the Massachusetts Government Act, which pretty much stripped the colony of its self-governance. Talk about adding insult to injury. In response to these acts, the colonists decided it was time to come together and discuss their next move. In September of 1774, representatives from 12 of the 13 colonies met in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress. Let's just say it wasn't a party. They debated, they argued, and they even threatened to arm themselves if Britain didn't back down. And in a move that surely had King George III spitting out his tea, they decided to boycott all British goods. That's right, they refused to buy anything British. No tea, no sugar, no fancy clothing or furniture. They even discouraged the consumption of British liquor, which, let's be honest, was probably the hardest pill to swallow. In essence, the colonists were sending a clear message to Britain. We won't be pushed around, we won't be punished unjustly, and we won't be silenced. They were standing up for their rights and their liberties, and they were willing to go to great lengths to protect them. By this point, the colonists are not just upset, they're ready for a fight. 1775 rolls around and it's time for the main event, the American Revolutionary War. Now, this wasn't your typical day at the races. No, sir, this was a high-stakes tug-of-war between the mighty British Empire and a scrappy band of colonists with a dream of self-rule. The first shots rang out in the sleepy towns of Lexington and Concord. The shot heard round the world, as it's famously known, was more like a starting gun for the marathon of independence. And boy, did it echo. As the dust settled on these initial skirmishes, the colonists realized they needed some form of organization. Enter the Continental Army, a group of farmers, blacksmiths, and, well, anyone who could hold a musket. They weren't the most polished bunch, but their spirit was unbreakable. At the helm of this ragtag group was none other than George Washington, a man who knew a thing or two about leadership and wooden teeth. Now, while all this was kicking off, a group of men, who we now know as the Founding Fathers, were busy drafting a little something called the Declaration of Independence. In July 1776, they put pen to parchment and made it official. This wasn't just a breakup letter to King George III, it was a bold statement of self-determination and human rights. With phrases like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it's no wonder it became a bestseller. The adoption of the Declaration of Independence was a defining moment, a point of no return. It was the equivalent of the colonists changing their Facebook status from "It's complicated with Britain" to "single." The colonists had officially said, enough is enough. They were ready to be Americans, not British subjects. This was the birth of a nation built on the principles of freedom, equality, and democracy. And let me tell you, it was one heck of a birthday party. Fast forward to 1781, and spoiler alert, the Americans win. The year was 1781. The British, led by Lord Cornwallis, were hunkered down in Yorktown, Virginia, expecting reinforcements any day. But as fate would have it, the French and American forces had other plans. They encircled Yorktown, cutting off any chance of escape or resupply. The British were trapped, and on October 19th, Cornwallis surrendered. This, my friends, was the Battle of Yorktown, the last major battle of the Revolutionary War. But the victory didn't come with a giant game over sign. There were still a couple more levels to complete. The Treaty of Paris had to be negotiated and signed, which finally happened in 1783. This was the official "we're done here" moment. The aftermath of the war was like the morning after a wild party. There was relief, euphoria, a massive hangover, and a big mess to clean up. The newly formed United States of America had to figure out how to govern itself, pay off war debts, and maintain peace with the Native Americans. But despite the challenges, there was a sense of optimism and unity. The underdogs had won. They had taken on one of the most powerful empires in the world and emerged victorious. And so, against all odds, the United States of America was born. And that, folks, is the abridged version of how America decided to break up with Britain. From the seeds of discontent to the victorious birth of a nation, we've traced the tumultuous path that led to American independence. A journey filled with fierce debates, daring acts of rebellion, and an unwavering commitment to liberty. This was the crucible that shaped the United States as we know it. If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, or if you learned something new, please like and subscribe for more. Until next time, keep exploring our past because, as they say, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it.